7 minutes ago, detectives revealed something chilling and concrete. A small caliber firearm was found hidden inside the nursery, tucked behind the curtains, mere feet from where the crib once stood. That single, undeniable discovery changes everything about how investigators read the scene. It's not a vague lead or a stray rumor, it's physical evidence in the room meant to protect a child. If you care about the truth in this case, subscribe now and drop your view in the comments below. Tell us what you think that weapon means, who it points to, and what questions you want answered as investigators continue. Your voice matters. We'll read every comment and follow the best tips. Let's stay laser focused on that weapon and what it implies. First, location matters. A firearm hidden behind nursery curtains within arm's reach of a crib raises immediate, specific investigative questions. Was it placed there deliberately to be found? Was it concealed to hide it from a search? Or was it intended to be within reach at some point? The proximity to the crib makes this more than a stray firearm in a house. It suggests a level of intent or recklessness that prosecutors will emphasize and defense lawyers will have to explain away. Investigators will map the exact position of the gun in relation to the crib, the curtain rod, and any nearby furniture, because small differences in placement can support very different narratives in court. Next, the make, model, and condition of the firearm become forensic priorities. Detectives will photograph it extensively in place, then remove it following strict chain of custody protocols. They will note whether the gun is loaded, whether there are fingerprints on the grip or safety, whether there is visible hair, fibers, or biological material on the surface, and whether the serial number is intact or has been filed off. Every observable detail is evidence. If the serial number is present, investigators will run it through tracing databases to determine where and when the gun was purchased and whether it has a history, stolen, registered to someone, or previously linked to other incidents. Ballistics and firing condition are core technical questions. Did this gun ever discharge? Forensic examiners will test for fired primer residue, extract any chambered cartridge, and look for microscopic markings consistent with having been fired. If bullets or casings linked to the firearm are found in evidence, in the home, in surrounding areas, or matched to autopsy reports in other cases, that creates a chain that ties the weapon to action. If the gun has not been fired, that fact still matters. An unfired weapon found in a nursery is a serious indicator of potential threat or concealment, and investigators will explore how and why it was there. Gunshot residue testing is another crucial step. Technicians will swab the weapon, surrounding surfaces, and the hands of any persons who had recent access to determine whether residue from firing is present. Residue can indicate recent discharge, but it's also notoriously tricky. False positives and environmental transfer are possible, and interpretation must be careful. That's why residue findings are usually combined with other evidence, DNA, fingerprints, witness statements, surveillance data, to build a coherent picture. DNA and trace evidence are high-value leads here. Investigators will swab grips, trigger surfaces, and inside the barrel if forensically appropriate. They'll lift latent fingerprints from the metal or polymer surfaces. They'll collect fibers from the curtain where the weapon was concealed and compare them to clothing detected on suspects. Even a small skin cell can yield a DNA profile that places a person in contact with the gun. If the DNA matches one of the household members, investigators will need to determine whether that match is consistent with innocent possession or whether it points to recent handling at a critical time. Chain of custody cannot be overstated. Once the gun is photographed in situ, properly packaged and logged, every transfer from the crime scene to evidence lockers to the forensic lab must be documented. Prosecutors will rely on a pristine chain of custody to ensure that the evidence presented at trial is the same item seized at the scene and has not been tampered with. Defense teams will scrutinize these records early and hard. Any break or sloppy handling can undermine the weapon's admissibility or at least create reasonable doubt about its integrity. Investigative timing matters as much as the object itself. Detectives will reconstruct who had access to the nursery in the hours before and after the gun was placed. They will pull phone records, check door locks and security footage if available, and re-interview household members about their movements. They will also look for purchases or recent transfers of firearms, receipts, pawnshop transactions, online orders, or communications mentioning a gun. If the weapon is traced to a recent purchase, a paper trail could point to ownership or allowed transfers. If it's stolen, that will shift the investigative focus to a different set of suspects. Forensic labs will run the firearm through a battery of tests. These include microscopic examination of the firing pin and barrel for tool marks, testing for biological fluids, and comparison against any bullets or casings recovered elsewhere. If a projectile can be matched to the barrel, that can place the firearm at the center of the act investigators are probing. If not, the presence of the gun still remains a damning piece of physical evidence that prosecutors can use to argue opportunity and means. Contextual questions are inevitable. Why hide it near the crib? One theory investigators will test is whether the gun was used, then concealed in shock or panic. Another is that it was intentionally hidden to create a false narrative, either to suggest an intruder planted it, or conversely to hide a weapon after an injury. There's also the disturbing possibility that the firearm was kept near the child as a means of control or intimidation. Each hypothesis demands corroborating evidence: blood patterns, witness statements, digital traces, or other physical indicators that align with one scenario over the others. Because the discovery is so central, you can expect a focused legal response. Prosecutors will likely include the firearm prominently in charging documents and probable cause affidavits. They will describe the weapon's location, condition, and forensic results to demonstrate not only that a weapon existed in the nursery, but that it ties to the alleged offense. The presence of a gun in a nursery dramatically strengthens charges that involve recklessness, endangerment, or homicide because it speaks directly to danger inflicted upon a vulnerable child. Defense strategies commonly follow three tracks in cases like this. First, challenge the provenance. Argue that the weapon belongs to someone else, was planted, or was transferred without knowledge. Second, attack the chain of custody or forensic procedures. Show that protocols were not followed, and therefore results are unreliable. Third, offer an innocent explanation for the weapon's presence: a recently acquired firearm for protection, temporarily stored there by someone who had no intent to harm, or even a staged situation by a third party. Each of these defenses requires its own evidence or circumstantial narrative, which is why meticulous investigative work by detectives is so important. Public perception will also shape the case. A firearm in a nursery is sensational and emotionally charged. Jurors and community members react strongly to such imagery. That is why prosecutors must balance the emotional weight of the finding with the need to present sober, corroborated evidence in court. Judges often issue gag orders or limit pretrial publicity in high-profile matters like this because community outrage can threaten the fairness of a trial. Expect media coverage to focus heavily on the weapon and for attorneys on both sides to strategize about how that coverage affects potential jurors. Let's talk specifics of what the lab timeline might look like without getting into unreachable promises. Certain tests are relatively quick. Basic surface swabs, preliminary fingerprint processing, and photographic documentation can be completed within days. More complex analyses, DNA profiling, ballistic comparisons against national databases like NIBIN, or detailed trace chemistry can take weeks or longer, depending on backlog and lab capacity. Prosecutors sometimes file initial charges based on probable cause while waiting for lab confirmations. That staged approach is standard and does not imply weakness in the case. It reflects the practical pace of forensic work. Another technical angle, the firearm's traceability. If the serial number is intact, law enforcement will run the gun through tracing services that can reveal the first retail purchaser and subsequent transfers. If the original purchaser is a household member, that is an immediate link investigators will explore. If the gun was acquired illegally, that raises questions of access and collusion. In some investigations, owners attempt to conceal ownership by deliberately altering serial numbers. Forensic specialists can sometimes recover ground-off numbers through chemical or ultrasonic techniques. That's specialized work, but it's part of how modern forensics can pierce attempts to hide provenance. Ballistics databases are powerful tools. If any projectile fragments or casings are recovered from other locations or are linked to other crimes, ballistic comparison can create connections across cases that solidify an investigative narrative. Conversely, an absence of ballistic links does not negate the presence of the weapon. The firearm's physical presence near the crib remains a major evidentiary fact, even if it's not matched to a fired round. Chain of custody again deserves emphasis because it's the legal backbone of physical evidence. Every technician, detective, and evidence custodian who handled the gun will be listed in logs. Defense attorneys will depose these individuals and examine every transfer for lapses. That's why crime scene technicians photograph, label, and package meticulously, and why prosecutors rely on that documentation at trial to authenticate evidence. If any single handoff is undocumented, the defense can argue contamination or substitution became possible. Investigators will also look outward from the nursery. Did neighbors hear a sound? Did surveillance cameras show anyone entering the house around relevant times? Do phone records place anyone near the property? Are there communications indicating fear, anger, or planning about a firearm? Investigative work is never about a single piece of evidence in isolation. It's about how that piece integrates with digital, testimonial, and physical evidence to form a coherent story. Let's consider behavioral patterns. The deliberate concealment of a firearm in a child's room suggests an attempt to either hide the weapon quickly or to keep it readily accessible.
The behavioral inference investigators draw will depend on other findings. Was the weapon loaded? Were there cleaning materials nearby? Were there signs suggesting someone tried to clean a scene? Those ancillary observations can either corroborate or contradict the theory that the gun was used in an incident. Forensic pathology and medical examinations intersect here when a weapon is linked to an injury. If any wound evidence exists, even if the body has not been recovered publicly, the medical examiner's findings will be crucial. If ballistic evidence or trauma correlates to the firearm, that creates a direct forensic tie between the weapon and harm. Without a body, connecting the gun to a death requires more circumstantial assembly. For example, blood evidence matching the missing child's DNA found on or near the weapon, or admitted statements that align with the physical evidence. Speaking of blood, investigators will look carefully for any biological material on the weapon, nearby curtains or the crib. Blood pattern analysis on textiles and surfaces helps forensic specialists determine whether bleeding occurred at the scene.